July 2023. The demolition of the highway overpass next to the old Cleveland Industrial Combine was routine work, until an excavator's bucket scraped against metal where city blueprints showed only clay. Beneath the earth was a corroded access hatch, sealed by decades of rust and silence. When the crew finally pried it open, the beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness and fell upon the tattered remains of factory overalls wrapped around a human skeleton. The bones of the right hand were clenched around a single, inexplicable object, a perfectly preserved, hand-carved boomerang of dark wood. It was an artifact with no place in this forgotten tomb, a detail that had never appeared in any report. In that instant, the file on Monica Harris, a 24-year-old packer who had vanished without a trace 26 years earlier, was officially reopened. August 12, 1997. The air inside the Cleveland Industrial Combine already hung thick with the heat of the coming afternoon. For Monica Harris, it was just another Tuesday, another shift spent in the rhythmic noise of the packing line, a world she had entered a year prior, leaving behind a small town for the promise of a steady paycheck. She was a quiet presence, known more for her diligence than her conversation. Her co-workers saw her as an introvert, a dreamer who kept to herself. They didn't know she was meticulously saving for a small apartment, a space that would finally be her own. Her workstation gave her a clear view of the inventory logs, and Monica's mind was wired for detail. For the past few weeks, she'd noticed small things, discrepancies that didn't add up, numbers that felt wrong. She didn't suspect malice. She saw only an error, a puzzle to be solved. It was a matter of professional pride. She had even decided to mention it to her foreman, Garrett Pierce. He was a rising star at the Combine, charismatic and always willing to listen. Just last week, he had surprised her with a strange gift, a dark wooden boomerang he said he'd carved himself. "They say, if you throw it right, it always comes back to you," he'd told her with a smile. The gesture was odd, but kind. It made him seem approachable, the right person to talk to about the inventory problem. She decided she'd catch him on her way to the canteen and just let him know that something wasn't right. The 1 o'clock bell shrieked, signaling the lunch break. Monica clocked out, her name stamped onto the time card for the last time. She walked out of the overwhelming noise of the factory floor and into the relative quiet of the service corridor. Co-workers saw her turn towards the exit leading to the overpass, a shortcut to the canteen. Then, nothing. Her car remained in the employee lot, its interior collecting dust and sun. Her final paycheck sat in a file, untouched. Her locker held her purse, a few dollars inside for lunch. The life of Monica Harris didn't end with a bang, but with a sudden, inexplicable silence. Detective Owen Dalton of the Cleveland PD's Cold Case Unit stood at the edge of the newly opened chasm, the humid July air mixing with the subterranean chill. 26 years. A secret had been fermenting in the dark for 26 years. His team worked under the harsh glare of portable lights, their movements deliberate, almost reverent. A forensic anthropologist carefully brushed soil from a fractured vertebra. A technician photographed the tattered overalls, their blue fabric faded to a ghostly gray. Every particle of dust was a potential narrator. And then there was the object, still held fast in the skeletal grip of the victim's right hand. The boomerang. It felt alien in this context, a piece of a different world dropped into a grim, industrial tomb. It was smooth, dark, and cool to the touch. Dalton watched as it was carefully pried loose, bagged, and labeled. An artifact out of time, out of place. The initial findings from the medical examiner were delivered in a clipped, professional tone. The victim was female, Caucasian, mid-20s. Dental records provided a match within hours. Monica Harris. The cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma to the posterior of the skull. A fracture, clean and catastrophic. It was consistent with a fall or a powerful single blow. This discovery didn't answer questions, it created them, each one more complex than the last. The first questions weren't about motive, but mechanics. Who had access to a sealed city utility tunnel in 1997? Its existence wasn't even on most contemporary maps. Why was the hatch not just closed, but corroded shut in a way that suggested it hadn't been touched since? And then, the central discordant question that hung over the entire scene. Why the boomerang? What was a 24-year-old factory packer from Ohio doing with a hand-carved hunting weapon from Australia? This wasn't a spontaneous crime. This was a calculated disposal. Someone hadn't just taken a life. They had leveraged the city's own forgotten infrastructure to entomb their secret, confident that layers of steel, earth, and time would be enough to guarantee their silence. In 1997, the initial investigation into Monica Harris's disappearance was less a search for truth and more an exercise in closing a file. The report landed on the desk of a detective juggling a dozen violent crime cases. A missing factory worker with no local family and few friends was, by the grim calculus of law enforcement, a low priority. Investigators performed the requisite checks. Her apartment was untouched, her locker was neat, her bank account was dormant. The whole scene suggested not abduction, but departure. Interviews with her colleagues yielded a consistent, if incomplete, portrait. She was quiet, a loner, kept to herself. Her foreman, a charismatic and well-regarded manager named Garrett Pierce, was particularly helpful. He expressed genuine concern, describing Monica as a good worker, but also as a dreamer, someone who often seemed distant, perhaps unhappy with her life in Cleveland. His testimony, delivered with calm authority, subtly steered the police toward the most convenient conclusion. He wasn't a person of interest. He was a character witness for the official narrative. The Cleveland Industrial Combine itself, a significant local employer, cooperated but did little to encourage a deeper probe. A missing employee was a human resources issue, a potential liability to be managed, not a crime to be solved. Their institutional desire was for the problem to vanish as quietly as their employee had. There was no conspiracy, no overt pressure applied to the police department. There didn't need to be. With no signs of foul play, no one demanding daily updates, and a plausible company-endorsed theory of a young woman simply starting over, the investigation withered. The official conclusion was logged. Runaway. Monica Harris, the invisible girl at the factory, had chosen to remain invisible. The case file was closed in under a month. The silence that followed was not born of a sinister pact, but of a far more common human failing: indifference. It was a silence of convenience, a collective decision to accept the simplest answer and move on. This silence was not just negligence, it was a form of complicity, a passive agreement that allowed a woman's entire existence to be erased and entombed, both figuratively and literally, for the next 26 years. The present-day investigation began with echoes. Detective Dalton's team fanned out across Ohio, tracking down the ghosts of the Cleveland Industrial Combine. They found them in quiet suburban homes and sterile nursing facilities, their memories of 1997 layered under 26 years of life. Most recalled Monica Harris as a blur, a quiet face on the packing line. Their recollections were faded, unreliable, tinged with the melancholy of time. The past was a foreign country, and its maps were lost. One interview stood out. Alistair Finch, a former security guard, was a frail man in a wheelchair, his voice a dry whisper. When shown a photo of Monica, he grew agitated. He spoke of seeing her that last day near the overpass, talking heatedly with the foreman fella, the popular one. But the memory was fractured. He couldn't recall the foreman's name, and his timeline shifted with each question. He seemed less forgetful than afraid, as if disturbing the memory would carry a present-day cost. It was a lead, but one shrouded in fog. With human memory failing, Dalton turned to the one witness that never forgets: paper. The Combine's archives were a sarcophagus of corporate history, stored in a damp basement where cardboard boxes sagged under the weight of time. Dalton's team began the monumental task of digitizing decades of rotting documents, invoices, shipping manifests, transfer orders, everything. It was a search for a single anomalous word in a library of jargon. While they sifted through paper, the boomerang was being analyzed by a specialist. The report landed on Dalton's desk like a thunderclap. The wood was identified as Australian blackwood, an expensive and non-native timber. More importantly, chemical analysis revealed microscopic traces of a specific industrial sealant, a formula used exclusively at the Cleveland Combine for a brief period in the mid-1990s. The object wasn't a random keepsake, it was intrinsically tied to the factory. It had been born there, or at least finished there. The discovery recontextualized the entire search. The answer wasn't in Monica's distant past, but inside the walls of the Combine. Dalton's team redoubled their efforts in the archives, now looking for anything related to woodworking, imports, or specialized materials. Days turned into weeks. The search yielded nothing but purchase orders for industrial lubricants and steel girders. Then, late one Thursday, an intern flagged a document. Buried in a stack of petty cash receipts from June of 1997 was a single, unusual requisition. It was an expense claim for a set of high-end, specialized wood carving knives signed off against a departmental discretionary fund. The fund was controlled by the floor foreman. In an ocean of industrial steel and concrete, it was the first tangible link to an act of creation. The first sign that a man of metal was also a man of wood. With the investigation into the Combine's archives yielding only a single cryptic receipt, Dalton's team pivoted. They re-examined Monica's personal life, looking for the source of a threat from outside the factory walls. In a long-forgotten storage unit containing her meager belongings, they found what they were looking for: a box of letters from a former boyfriend in her hometown, a man named Mark Renshaw. The tone of the letters shifted over time, from affection to possessiveness, then to anger. A background check revealed a 1994 conviction for assault. Suddenly, a compelling narrative took shape. The jilted ex-lover, unable to accept Monica's new life, follows her to Cleveland. He confronts her, his temper flares, and the encounter turns fatal. It was a simple, brutal, and tragically common story. Detectives drove to Monica's hometown and interviewed Renshaw, now a man in his 50s, with a life lived in the shadow of his youthful mistakes. He couldn't provide a concrete alibi for a specific Tuesday afternoon 26 years ago. No one could. The local news media, catching wind of the development, ran with the story. "Jilted lover suspected in cold case murder," the headlines declared. Mark Renshaw's past was dissected on television, his old mugshot juxtaposed with photos of a smiling Monica Harris. The public narrative was set, and the pressure on the department mounted. For 2 weeks, the full force of the investigation was directed at breaking Renshaw's story, digging for a witness or a piece of evidence that would place him in Cleveland in August of 1997. The theory was logical, it was compelling, and it was completely wrong. The collapse came from a sterile laboratory. During a painstaking forensic re-examination of Monica's overalls, a technician had managed to isolate a single microscopic skin cell from beneath a seam, one that did not belong to the victim. A full DNA profile was extracted. A court order was issued, and a sample was taken from Mark Renshaw. The results were irrefutable. It was not a match. The public's prime suspect was exonerated by a fragment of biological truth smaller than a grain of sand. The investigation had spent invaluable time and resources chasing a ghost, while the real killer's secret remained undisturbed. They were back at square one, with nothing but a strange wooden boomerang and a receipt for a set of carving knives. Frustration had settled over the cold case unit. The false lead had consumed weeks, and the investigation was adrift in a sea of 26-year-old facts that led nowhere. Detective Dalton returned his focus to the only tangible threads he had: the boomerang, the carving knives, and the factory. The digitization of the Combine's archives continued, more out of procedural necessity than hope. It was a monotonous, soul-crushing task, scanning thousands of pages of corporate history, searching for a needle in a haystack of paper. The breakthrough came not with a shout, but with the quiet click of a mouse. An intern, bleary-eyed from hours of scanning, flagged a file. It was a low-resolution scan of an internal company newsletter from the October 1996 edition. The feature article was a staff spotlight, a cheerful piece designed to boost employee morale. The subject of that month's spotlight was Garrett Pierce, the charismatic and ambitious young foreman. Dalton stared at the scanned page on his monitor. The photograph showed a smiling Pierce, a man on the rise, standing proudly in his home workshop. The article praised his leadership and dedication. It listed his hobbies as sailing and amateur woodcarving. And there, on the wall behind him, hanging next to a set of hand tools, was a dark, wooden boomerang, its shape and finish almost identical to the one found in Monica Harris's hand. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying metallic certainty. The anonymous DNA found on Monica's overalls was run against the sample voluntarily provided by Pierce during the initial witness interviews in 1997. It was a perfect match. The receipt for the carving knives, authorized by the foreman's discretionary fund, now had a face. Alistair Finch's fragmented memory of the foreman fella talking to Monica by the overpass solidified into a clear image. But it was the article's closing quote from Pierce himself that sealed it. Beaming in the photo, he had told the company newsletter, "I like working with my hands. You take a piece of wood, and you can make it into anything. I even made a boomerang. They say if you throw it right, it always comes back to you." In that moment, Dalton understood the motive. This wasn't a crime of passion. Monica, the meticulous packer, must have noticed the inventory discrepancies, the very discrepancies that funded Pierce's future. She wasn't a victim of random violence. She was a loose end, a quiet, diligent woman who was about to unknowingly unravel a man's entire life's ambition with a simple, honest question. The boomerang wasn't a weapon, it was a trophy. A signature left at the scene, a chilling prophecy that had finally, after 26 years, come true. Based on Garrett Pierce's confession, supported by the forensic evidence, the final minutes of Monica Harris's life can be reconstructed with chilling clarity. On August 12, 1997, she clocked out for lunch with a simple goal: to inform her foreman about the inventory errors she had discovered. It was a matter of professional integrity. She saw him waiting for her near the service exit under the highway overpass, a grey, forgotten space that served as a shortcut to the canteen. Pierce's initial approach was one of charm and misdirection. He listened patiently, then tried to dismiss her concerns as a simple clerical error he would handle himself. He spoke of corporate bureaucracy, of how flagging the issue would create unnecessary paperwork for everyone. He was trying to gently guide her away from the truth. But Monica was meticulous. She wasn't accusing him, she was simply stating a fact. The numbers were wrong, and she believed management needed to know. Her quiet persistence was something he hadn't anticipated. Her polite refusal to drop the matter was, for Pierce, the pulling of a pin from a grenade. His entire future, the embezzled funds, the plans for his own company, the life he was carefully building, was about to be incinerated by the innocent diligence of this quiet woman. His composure cracked. The friendly foreman vanished, replaced by a man cornered by cold panic. He grabbed her arm, his voice dropping to a harsh command, telling her to forget what she saw. The argument became a brief, desperate struggle in the shadow of the overpass. There was a sudden, violent shove. The sound was not loud, a dull, sickening thud as the back of Monica's head met the concrete lip of the open utility tunnel. It was followed by a sound even more terrible: absolute silence. Her protest was cut short, mid-word. She fell, not with a cry, but as a dead weight, her body coming to rest at the threshold of the dark opening. The boomerang he had given her, still clutched in her hand, fell with her. For a moment, Garrett Pierce froze, the architect of a future now facing the architect of his ruin. Then, his mind, trained for logistical problem-solving, shifted from intimidation to concealment. There was no grand plan, only the animal instinct to hide his mistake. The open tunnel was right there, a pre-made tomb. He dragged her form into the darkness, the space smelling of damp earth and rust. The heavy iron grate was slid back into place. The scrape of metal on concrete was the last sound in that desolate space. Pierce walked away, emerging from under the overpass and back into the bright afternoon sun. He returned to the factory, went to a washroom, and methodically cleaned the dirt from his hands. He composed himself, burying the secret not just in a forgotten tunnel, but deep within himself, under layers of ambition and denial. He clocked back in from his lunch break, just a few minutes late. Detective Dalton conducted the final interview at Garrett Pierce's corporate headquarters, a building of glass and steel that was a monument to the life he had built. Pierce, now a celebrated pillar of the Cleveland business community, was initially charming, offering condolences for a woman he claimed to barely remember. Dalton said nothing. He simply slid 2 photographs across the polished mahogany desk, the evidence photo of the boomerang clutched in a skeletal hand, and the grainy image from the 1996 company newsletter. He watched as 26 years of carefully constructed composure shattered into dust. Pierce was arrested that afternoon, the titan of industry escorted from his office in a quiet procedural procession that belied the earthquake it sent through the city. The news of his arrest reached a nursing home on the outskirts of the city. Alistair Finch, the former security guard, saw Pierce's face on the television and knew his silence was no longer tenable. He contacted Detective Dalton. In a voice thin with age and thick with guilt, he corroborated the timeline, confirming he had seen Pierce and Monica engaged in a heated conversation by the overpass on that final day. He admitted that Pierce had visited him weeks later, handing him a thick envelope of cash as a severance bonus, an unspoken contract for silence that Alistair had honored for over 2 decades. The trial was a media spectacle. The prosecution laid out the evidence with methodical precision. The DNA, the archived newsletter, the boomerang itself, which sat on the evidence table like a dark, accusing bird. Pierce's defense attorneys argued the death was a tragic accident, a panicked mistake. But Alistair Finch's testimony, combined with Pierce's initial confession, painted a clear picture of a cover-up. The jury found Garrett Pierce guilty of manslaughter. At the age of 54, he was sentenced to a term of 15 to 25 years in state prison. The public, which had weeks earlier been convinced of the guilt of an innocent man, was forced to confront a more unsettling truth: that a monster could wear the mask of a philanthropist, and that a pillar of the community could be built upon a foundation of entombed secrets. For Monica Harris, there were no surviving family members in Cleveland to offer a tearful statement on the courthouse steps. Justice was served, but there was no one left to receive it on her behalf. The verdict was a legal conclusion, a closing of a file that had been left open for a quarter of a century. It was an accounting, but not a restoration. The law had delivered its consequence, but it could not rewind time. It could not give Monica Harris back the 26 years of life she never got to live, the small apartment she never got to rent, or the future she was meticulously saving for. Legal justice had been served, but it was a cold and hollow comfort. The demolition of the old highway overpass is complete. Today, where the corroded hatch once lay hidden beneath the earth, there is a smooth, manicured lawn. It is an anonymous patch of green, indistinguishable from thousands of others across the city, designed to erase any memory of the industrial grime that once defined this place. On a nearby railing, almost invisible to passing traffic, a small bronze plaque has been affixed. It was placed there at Detective Dalton's request. It bears no poetry, only a name and 2 dates: Monica Harris, 1973 to 1997. Garrett Pierce's logistics empire, built on a foundation of stolen materials and a buried secret, was dismantled and sold off to competitors. An empire of concrete and steel, undone by a single, handcrafted piece of wood. That piece of wood, the dark boomerang carved from Australian blackwood, now rests in the climate-controlled stillness of the Cleveland Police Historical Archives. It is logged as evidence, a silent object that, true to its nature, finally came back, bringing a terrible truth with it. The story of Monica Harris became a local cautionary tale. A story about how a person can build a life of success and prestige over a hollow, dark space. How silence can be a form of violence. And how the most insignificant object, forgotten in the dark, can hold enough weight to bring an entire world crashing down. And so, where the pit was, there is now a smooth lawn, perfectly smooth, as if nothing had ever been beneath it. But the silence here is different. It rings,